Welcome to Whatsoever More or Less. My name is Jason. We'll see how today's setup works versus yesterday's setup. You know, when you listen to conference talks, you learn a lot of the laws of nature and of nature's God, a lot of principles that we should be applying to our study of the Constitution and to our study of God's laws regarding human interaction in general. I was listening to Elder Uchtdorf this morning at my Constitution channel. Tends to give me certain kinds of recommendations a lot, which is typically general conference talks and Constitution content. And Elder Uchtdorf opens up with this story about a plane that was off course by 1 degree, right? And how a plane that's off course by 1 degree, or maybe it wasn't a story about it, but rather an example of what could happen, I think. But rather, he said, being off by 1 degree and traveling the distance that plane was intended to travel would have put it 500 miles away from its destination. Okay, I think this is an important concept. Then he moves over into the story of Saul. When the Philistines come, now they've defeated these people, now suddenly the Philistines come, and there's so many of them, the Israelites don't know what to do. So Samuel tells them, go hide in the caves, go get yourselves up to your prepper cabins, right, with your bunkers and all that kind of stuff, and wait for me. And I'll come soon and offer a sacrifice and pray to the Lord, see what we should do. Okay? And instead, they wait for 7 days, the Israelites do, and then they get impatient, Saul in particular. And now you got to remember, this government system that the Israelites had is one that God claimed credit for. It wasn't his favorite one for them, but he did claim credit for it. It's set up by God. But it's besides the point. Saul did not have the authority to offer the sacrifice that was Samuel's stewardship. He had his duty. Samuel had his. But Saul got impatient, says, "No, we need it right now." So he goes and offers the sacrifice, something he had no authority to do. At that point, Samuel recognized there's something wrong with this guy. He doesn't understand his place. Now you might think, well, who are you, Jason, to be talking about the Constitution? Actually, this is my place, because you got to look at the Constitution, a Heavenly Banner, which there was a book version, the talk version at BYU, and then the shorter version given in General Conference called Our Divine Constitution by Ezra Taft Benson, and he told us to do what I'm doing. Nobody's told us to stop doing it. Okay, so basically to discuss the Constitution, to be able to teach it, to know it, to be able to recognize when something's constitutionally unsound. It's the only time I've ever heard them just tell us to just get out there and just start teaching it, start studying it, start teaching it, start discussing it. There's no set of discussions or anything like that. It's just we're supposed to be studying it. So anyhow, Saul claims to himself a power out of expediency, which reminds me of a story you should look up that President Thomas S. Monson told about a tribute the sons of and daughters of H. Verlin Anderson paid to him at his funeral, because H. Verlin Anderson, who was this guy who always said the government needs to stick to its proper role and not exercise unrighteous dominion, would not, out of expediency to get to his church meetings, gas up the car on Sunday. To him, expediency did not justify violating covenants. Okay, so he was not a hypocrite at all in everything that he stood for in his books, and that's one of the things his kids pointed out. So, but Saul, he felt the expediency. Oh no, we got to get this done. Samuel shows up shortly after. He says, "What the heck are you doing?" Right? Okay. Israel was off. They shouldn't have wanted a king in the first place. They had a system of more distribution of power, but they wanted a king. Okay, fine. They were off. We all know how things gradually went for Israel. Samuel claimed powers unto himself that he shouldn't have been claiming, right? Early on in the history of the United States of America, and so one thing that President Uchtdorf says, this is right after President Uchtdorf got made part of the first presidency, by the way. You can tell by the nature of the talk. He says, Saul succumbed to pressure. Okay, so it wasn't completely Saul's idea, but rather he was getting pressured to do something about it. The Israelites were panicking, losing faith in the system that God set up, and rather than sticking to the system that God set up, where God said whatsoever more or less comes of evil, basically, right? Same thing we say with the Constitution. God set it up and he says, whatsoever more or less comes of evil. Out of expediency, they found a way to explain how, oh no, well, Saul probably has the authority to do this, right? That's not the way it works. So, by the way, regarding one thing where the president did have the authority, but he came up with an explanation for why he didn't. And Joseph Smith said they should give a death penalty for officers of government who have sworn an oath to the Constitution who failed to defend the privileges according to their oath of office. Okay, so the president has the take care clause in Article 2, and the Constitution says it's the supreme law of the land. In Article 4, Section 2, Clause 1 says the citizens of the several states are entitled to the privileges and immunities of all the states, right? And so in other words, the president doesn't have to wait for anybody else if he notices that certain people here or there that have moved from this state to that state are suddenly getting like trampled, abused, killed by mobs, all that kind of stuff, their stuff taken from them. That's their privileges and immunities being taken away from them. The president doesn't have to wait for a request from the governor or anything like that. He can deal with it. Now, if the president doesn't notice it, the governor in Article 4, Section 4, or the state Congress can request it. But you got to understand, the executive, they wanted a strong executive. It was the Shays Rebellion that set off, that was the final straw that broke the camel's back, that they said we need to make a stronger constitution with a chief executive and then a backup plan, the vice president. So there's never any chance of us not having somebody just get the job done, the take care clause, okay? And that's the way Article 4, Section 2, Clause 1, that's in the president's power right off the bat. But if he's not noticing what's going on, Article 4, Section 4, okay? So once again, this isn't finding an excuse for the president. Joseph Smith said, no, the president already had the power. He made up some baloney of why he didn't. And somebody like that should be getting the death penalty. You guys got to check it out. Look up Joseph Smith, what he said. Okay, I'm getting off the subject. Barron v. Baltimore. I'm going to say that's the biggest one that put us off course. Alexander Hamilton put us off course. Governor Morris a little bit, but not so much maybe. Yeah, a little bit too, actually. Off by a degree. And people started looking at what they're saying and said, yeah, we can. There was pressure on George Washington. Hey, do this. They were pressuring him. That's exactly what happened to Saul that Elder Uchtdorf just described. Okay? President Uchtdorf at the time, back when he was part of the recent Thomas S. Monson presidency. So anyhow, being off by a single degree, the Constitution says, or the Doctrine and Covenants says, whatsoever more or less than the Constitution calls for or permits comes of evil. Whatsoever more or less comes of evil, right? That means that's a very measurable quantity. More is more, less is less. No, stay on course. Okay? Treaties that exercise more power than treaties were ever meant to exercise, that's an executive branch problem. This is another talk that followed up right after my phone auto-played. The next Elder Uchtdorf talk, and he talks about people who want to go ahead and abdicate their duties, hand them off to somebody else because they don't feel like they're qualified, right, in callings in church. By the way, do your callings in church then, you guys. We're supposed to do our callings, okay? And so president may make treaties, propose treaties that exercise far beyond what a normal treaty is supposed to exercise, which, by the way, the Louisiana Purchase does fit what treaties were allowed to exercise back then. Handing over stuff to international organizations to exercise laws over, say, for example, conservation and this and that here in the United States, that's never been part of a normal treaty power, okay? Non-endangered species that we have to completely leave alone because of international treaties or some garbage like that. Sorry to say garbage, but that's really kind of the way I see the whole thing. The executive agencies that have the power to legislate, enforce, and go ahead and exercise the judging of the violations of their rules, right? There's no checks and balances. There's no, say for example, when a law gets passed, the president has the option to veto it. Plus, there's two houses of Congress that can battle it out back and forth. There's so much checks and balances. When a treaty gets made, Senate can shoot it down, right? When an amendment gets proposed by the Congress, 3/4 of the state legislatures have to approve it. There's always some kind of double check. Judicial review doesn't have that. Supreme Court claiming powers out of expediency, like Saul, because it's urgent, we got to do it, right? That's off course. It's off course, and we're going to get way off course years and years down the road, okay? Executive agencies claiming all three branch powers unto themselves with no checks and balances and no elections, no people's consent whatsoever, and exercising powers far beyond those in Article 1, Section 8, right? That's handing over their duty because they're too nervous to do it themselves. Congress can't figure it out. They just want to hand it off to somebody else. That's like not doing your calling right and trying to hand it off to somebody else to do it, right? Calling in a bunch of experts that aren't even members of the church at all, that don't even have the authority to do your calling for you. Imagine that, right? Doesn't make sense, does it? Okay, good. So anyhow, a single degree off was the point that President Uchtdorf made, and he gave examples of out of expediency claiming powers into yourself, or out of a lack of confidence and respect for what your calling is, not doing it and handing it off to somebody else to do. Neither one of those is right. Family is supposed to be the fundamental unit of society. Had we stuck with that idea, even down to home production, the virtue of home production, which, listen to President Oak's recent talk in General Conference, right? It's virtuous, lovely, of good report, and praiseworthy, okay? Had we stuck with that, we would not be so reliant on government in the first place. Thomas Jefferson was right to advocate for that, and it's mega consistent with our doctrine. I'm not saying he was a perfect man, but I'm not saying Joseph Smith was a perfect man either. There's only one perfect, and that's Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ fought for us to have our freedom of choice here on this earth, wanted us to have our agency, said that he established the Constitution, whether the men who were framing it knew it or not, and the men who were ratifying it and demanding the Bill of Rights, which President Oak said is also inspired, right? The whole big complete picture, whether they knew it or not, Jesus Christ said, whatsoever is more or less than this Constitution allows or calls for comes of evil. So that's our Savior saying it. It's quantifiable, more or less, but you have to read it. If you don't read it, if you don't ask, you don't seek, you don't knock. Angels speak by the power of the Holy Ghost. You aren't going to get inspiration about it if you aren't reading it. Look at 2 Nephi chapter 32. You have to have the words of Christ in your head first, the stuff that he's claimed credit for, and then he can speak to you through those words that you've studied. So that's my thoughts for you. One degree off. That's just struck me as such a relevant thought to the Constitution. So, hey, you guys have a great day.